Hey everyone, I wanted to go over the new and exciting news that we got for Mario plus Rabbids Spark of Hope, which is set to release exclusively onto the Nintendo Switch on October 20th. And today what we're going to be checking out is a brand new wave of information, not just for how combat is going to be working, which we'll be talking about in just a bit, but also how exploration works within the game's brand new parameters. This information is coming to us directly from the latest Edge magazine, which was just recently released. So unless you're actually subscribed to it, chances are you probably haven't necessarily picked up on this. But it was actually posted online by Spooky Tango on the Famiboard's website. I'm going to be leaving a link in the description below for both. So a huge shout out to Spooky Tango for providing us with the quick blurbs for the details that they mention and they specify specifically on the magazine itself. They mentioned two specific sections, exploration and combat. So when it comes to exploration, they mentioned that the main creative team realized that the world from the first game was not really built around giving a good sense of exploration. So they wanted to get away from the corridor effect for the first game and provide more open areas. And this is something that we have seen in multiple gameplay clips, specifically in that overview trailer that they provided us with, where we got to see just as you're walking around outside of combat, you get to have more things to explore. They also mentioned that the planets you visit will now be quite as expansive as the worlds in Assassin's Creed, for example, which is kind of a given, but you will be exploring much more open areas, which will include a broad variety of activities, and this goes hand in hand with the exploration. Each new world provides you with a brand new mechanic or a brand new way to explore, a brand new hook that is actually specific to that world, and there you go. Now, the comparison with Assassin's Creed is kind of funny since those are massively wide open worlds, but of course, this one is a little bit more called back. They mentioned that they differentiate between critical path areas and side optional areas where you can find useful stuff like sparks. And this is always good to differentiate mainline content from side content, which is usually, less interesting in most games. It's hard to really pinpoint games that have like really good side quests. I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is a really good example of one that has some good, side quests, but the main content is really there. The main story is the real reason why you want to be there. They also mentioned that there are certain areas on a planet that you won't be able to access until you unlock exploration skills later in the game. So returning to earlier parts is encouraged, and this is the same Metroidvania effect that we see almost every game have nowadays. I believe Star Wars Fallen Order was the most recent game that I played that just blatantly told you have to come back here later when you unlock this other mechanic that obviously gonna be unlocking later into the game. It was still a good game, but it did have those pseudo locks added to it. Now, the last thing that they mentioned when it comes to exploration is that Beep O, this would be that little robot, can be used to scan the world to reveal hidden elements, conceptually similar to something like Metroid Prime. And, once again, I think that mechanic was available there in the first game or something extremely similar to it. Moving over to the actual combat sections of the post, they mentioned that getting rid of the grid in combat was a challenge, and they required multiple attempts before getting something that worked well. And that's because the game still had the grid system in the early development. And I think this is one of the biggest things that I've seen people kind of take away from some of the more recent trailers, is that the combat is no longer limited by the grid itself. This being a turn-based strategy game, not having necessarily limited movement, it is a bit interesting in the way they're approaching it. But of course, more movement is just one step closer to making that an action game. So I think it's a good way to go about it. It's a good middle ground at the very least. They mentioned that you control the characters directly on and off the battlefield now through Bebo. So basically you're going to be controlling the characters and moving them around as you please, which we already know. They mentioned that enemies can react to your choices in combat in real time, and this is actually directly connected, if I remember correctly, seeing it shown but not actually mentioned in one of the trailers, where one of the characters basically moved into behind like a wall or a protective area as Mario was kind of moving around the map, basically positioning to be able to attack. So that is basically the reactions that they are talking about. They also mentioned that you're not restricted to a particular team setup or require any character on the team. So that basically means that you're going to be bringing any of the characters that you want, be it the weird Rabbids or just the typical Mario characters, whichever way you want to go. They also mentioned that there may be battles in the game that use more characters or less characters than the usual team of 3 in combat. And this is just always a little wrench in the combat system. They take away characters for story reasons, or they bring them back later, or they add more because you're about to fight a big boss. That's kind of like something we've seen before. They also mentioned that the sparks are modular and can be used in many ways. You'll be able to set up 2 per character at a certain point in the game. You might use a spark to enhance the strength of a certain character, or a different spark to mitigate the weakness of a character. Now, if you don't necessarily know, the sparks are basically the little stars, like the Rosalina stars, that are like the weirdly have become Rabbids, and they basically provide you with buffs and or debuffs depending on whichever benefits you want to go with, like making things different elements and things of that nature, providing with a double jump or things like that. So you're going to be able to equip 2 at any one given time, and you're going to have different parameters for each one of them, which is kind of a given. The last thing that they do mention is that each character will only have 1 weapon in the game this time. However, it will be upgradable. Sparks are what will be used to add elementals and other kind of actives and passive effects. So when it comes to the sparks, I just mentioned that they would be elementals. Interestingly enough, that they do mention that there. But more importantly, that the weapons will just be limited to 1 per character. I don't remember how many weapons you ended up having in the other game, in the first game, but there were plenty of weapons. Maybe they're talking about just like the type of weapons you're going to be able to equip. So you're just going to upgrade it into different paths. But I do remember like the weapons themselves had like different skins, so you can make them look like differently and stuff of that nature. So I do remember that. So we're just gonna have to wait and see ultimately how does having just 1 weapon and being locked into that, and then providing you maybe through a skill tree to be able to customize the weapon, or maybe even reset it if you don't necessarily like it, into whichever way it is that you want to have it. Because again, it seems that they're opening up possibilities to make the game a little bit more active, not just in combat, with also the way that you're approaching the characters, just the freedom of the party setup to have just any character that you want. That's always going to be beneficial, but then to limit you when it comes to the weapons themselves and have maybe not that great of a variety when it comes to the weapon, that might be a little bit of a drawback. But if they provide it with a skill tree where you're going to be able to level up weapons however it is that you want, make them shoot faster or shoot slower but hit harder, those kind of things, maybe different effects, of course, through the sparks, is going to be the proper way to go. We're just going to have to wait and see, but the game is set to release very soon, so we'll be finding out much more details. If you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up, and as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.